I'm Alexander Brennan, I'm 27, and my own family tried to convince a room full of business titans that I was a broke, jobless failure, right up until the moment my face appeared on national television as a billionaire CEO. Before I tell you about the dead silence that fell over that steakhouse dinner, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories can travel. Alright, let's go back to that night. The air in the private dining room at Morton's was thick with the scent of money and grilled meat. It was the kind of place my father thrived in. Dark wood, leather chairs, and waiters who moved like ghosts. I, on the other hand, felt like I was wearing a costume even though I was in my own clothes. Dark jeans, a simple black turtleneck, and sturdy boots. Practical, comfortable, and, according to my father, a complete and utter embarrassment. He's just a warehouse worker, my father, Richard Brennan, was saying to his business partners. He said it with a casual, dismissive wave of his hand, as if swatting away a fly, or maybe swatting away me. The words were meant to be an apology for my very presence. My sister, Jessica, sitting beside him, added her own little jab. A smirk played on her perfectly glossed lips as she leaned toward the wife of one of the partners. "So embarrassing," she whispered, just loud enough for me and the man next to her to hear. It was a well-practiced performance of sisterly shame. I didn't say a word. I just took a slow sip of my water and smiled. Not a real smile, but one of those tight, polite ones you learn to perfect when you're the family disappointment. It was a shield. For years, it had been my only defense against their casual cruelty. They had no idea what was coming. I did. I had checked my watch just minutes before. It was 7:58 p.m. Any minute now. The conversation at the table droned on deals, mergers, the stock market. I was invisible, the black sheep son brought along out of some misplaced sense of familial duty, probably at my mother's insistence. My role was simple. Sit down, shut up, and don't remind anyone that I didn't belong in their world of corporate success. Then it happened. A waiter quietly turned on the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, switching it to the Bloomberg Financial News Network, just as my father had requested. He liked to have it on as background noise, a symbol of the world he belonged to. The anchor on screen finished a segment about market trends. Then she smiled warmly at the camera. "And now for our Innovator Spotlight," she announced, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the low murmur of the room. "Tonight, we're meeting the man who is quietly revolutionizing one of the world's oldest industries. He's been called the ghost in the machine of modern logistics." My father grunted, barely paying attention. Jessica was scrolling through her phone, probably checking likes on her latest post. The anchor continued. He turned down a guaranteed future on Wall Street to get his hands dirty, and in doing so, built a silent empire. A picture of a massive, state-of-the-art warehouse filled the screen. My warehouse, my systems, my empire. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. "Tonight," the anchor declared, her voice filled with admiration, "we meet the tech world's newest billion-dollar CEO, the founder of the game-changing flow state systems." The camera cut to a shot of me sitting in my office, looking directly into the lens. The chiron at the bottom of the screen was simple, brutal, and beautiful. Said my name, Alexander Brennan. The story doesn't start there, though. To understand the silence that followed, the looks of pure, unadulterated shock, you have to understand the years of noise that came before it. It all started 5 years ago in a different kind of expensive room, the dean's office at Columbia Business School. I was supposed to be there to discuss my second-year internship prospects. I already had offers lining up, the kind my father bragged about at his country club, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. It was the finish line of a race I'd been running my whole life, a race designed by my parents. Instead, I was there to drop out. "You're doing what?" My father's voice on the other end of the phone was dangerously quiet. I had called him right after the meeting, figuring it was better to rip the Band-Aid off quickly. "I'm leaving the program, Dad. I'm starting a company." I could hear him breathing, a long, slow hiss of disbelief. "Let me get this straight. You are walking away from an MBA from Columbia. You are turning your back on a guaranteed 6-figure salary, a career path that I have spent years helping you build. You're throwing away the entire college fund we saved for you. For what? A fantasy? It's not a fantasy, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's a software company. It's going to solve real-world problems in supply chain management. Supply chain? He practically spat the words. You want to work with trucks and boxes? We didn't raise you to be a glorified delivery boy, Alex. We raised you to be a leader, a financier, someone who works with their mind, not their hands. This is working with my mind, Dad. It's complex. It's about data, about efficiency. It's about warehouses, Alexander. It's a blue-collar world. It is beneath you. It is beneath this family. That was the core of it. To him, leadership meant a corner office on the 50th floor, not a dusty warehouse floor. It meant a title, a pedigree, a certain kind of suit. My idea, born from a summer job I'd taken in college to get some real-world experience, was messy. It was practical. It was, in his eyes, a step backward. When I got home that night, the family was waiting for me. It felt like an ambush, an intervention for a crime I hadn't yet committed. My mother was teary-eyed, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. My father was rigid with fury, standing by the fireplace like a judge. And Jessica looked smug. She was in her final year of law school, the golden child, following the pre-approved path to success. My deviation was just another confirmation of her superiority. How could you do this to us? My mother whispered. Think of our reputation. What will people say? What will I tell the ladies at the club? Maybe you can tell them I had the guts to build something myself, I countered, my own anger starting to simmer. Or maybe they'll say you failed, Jessica chimed in, filing her nails with a detached air. That you couldn't handle the pressure of real business school. That's what I'd think. That night, my father laid down the law. You do this, you're on your own. Don't come asking me for a dime. When this little project of yours inevitably fails, don't expect me to bail you out. You'll have to find your own way to pay back every penny of that college fund you've wasted. Consider it a loan with interest. He said it with a cruel certainty, as if he was already looking forward to my failure. I looked at their faces, disappointed, angry, dismissive, and in that moment, something inside me hardened. The desire for their approval, a constant hum in the background of my life, went silent. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just building a company for myself anymore. I was building it to prove them wrong. I walked out of that house with my laptop, a few $1,000s in savings, and a fire in my gut. I told my father I'd pay him back with interest. He just laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. That was the last time I asked them for anything. I was determined to succeed on my own terms, no matter how dirty my hands got. And believe me, they were about to get very, very dirty. For the next year, my office was a series of warehouses across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. I didn't rent a desk. I got a job. I operated forklifts, I packed boxes, I ran inventory sheets until my eyes blurred. I wasn't playing at being a worker, as Jessica would later accuse me of. I was doing the work. I was living the problem I wanted to solve. I was learning the system from the inside out, finding every inefficiency, every bottleneck, every single point of failure that the guys in corner offices never saw. I remember one specific Tuesday at a massive distribution center outside of Allentown. It was chaos. A shipment of electronics had been mislabeled, sending half the picking crew to the wrong side of the 300,000-square-foot facility. Tempers were flaring. The shift manager, a grizzled old guy named Sal, was about to blow a gasket. Orders were backing up. Money was being lost by the minute. While everyone was yelling, I was watching. I saw the flaw wasn't just the mislabeled pallet. It was the entire system. The inventory software was archaic. It updated in batches, not in real time. The pickers' routes were illogical, sending them crisscrossing the warehouse instead of following an optimized path. I spent my lunch break sketching out a new workflow on a greasy napkin. That night, instead of sleeping, I went home and coded a rudimentary simulation of my idea. A simple program that rerouted pickers based on real-time data. The next day, I showed it to Sal. He looked at my laptop, then at me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. You're the college kid, right? The one who quit some fancy school. Yeah, that's me, I said. And you think this little computer game is gonna fix my warehouse? Just give me one section, I pleaded. Section C. Let 2 of your guys use my pick path for 1 shift. If it doesn't work, I'll clean the loading dock toilets for a month. Sal grunted, but something in my voice must have convinced him. He agreed. By the end of the shift, the 2 pickers in Section C had processed 30% more orders than anyone else. Sal just stared at the numbers on my screen, shaking his head slowly. He became my first believer. He didn't understand the code, but he understood the results. He started feeding me information, telling me about the deeper problems the corporate bigwigs never heard about. Meanwhile, the calls from my family were infrequent but always pointed. My Uncle Mark, my dad's brother, was the worst. He'd call under the guise of checking in. So, Alex, he'd say, his voice oozing false concern. Still playing with trucks? Your sister just made junior partner at her firm. Big promotion. We're all so proud. Every conversation was a comparison. Jessica's rising salary. Jessica's new condo. Jessica's fancy corporate retreats. I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a tiny apartment in Astoria, my walls covered in whiteboards filled with complex algorithms. One call with Jessica stands out. I had just finished a brutal 16-hour shift helping Sal's team implement a beta version of my inventory system. I was exhausted, covered in grime, and just wanted to sleep. I don't get it, Alex, she said, her voice like ice. Why are you doing this to yourself? You look like a homeless person in the pictures Mom showed me. Don't you have any ambition? My ambition isn't to look successful, Jess. I told her, my voice hoarse. It's to be successful. There's a difference. Well, you could have fooled me, she scoffed. Dad says you've lost your mind. He's telling everyone you're just taking some time off to find yourself. It's humiliating. I hung up the phone, the word humiliating echoing in my ears. I looked at my hands, stained with grease and dirt. I looked at the lines of code on my screen, a language only a few people in the world understood. They saw humiliation. I saw the foundation of an empire. They saw a failure. I saw a man willing to do what it takes. But their words were like tiny cuts. Individually, they were nothing, but over time, they bled. There were nights I'd lie awake, the doubt creeping in. What if they were right? What if I was just a fool with a laptop, chasing a dream that would never materialize? It was in those dark moments that I learned to use their doubt as fuel. Every condescending phone call just made me work harder. The lowest point came about 2 years in during Thanksgiving dinner. It was the first major family gathering I'd attended since dropping out. I had just secured my first small seed funding from a group of angel investors. Not much, but it was enough to hire my first 2 employees, Sarah and Ben, and get a real office, even if it was a glorified closet in Long Island City. I was proud. For the first time, Flow State Systems was more than just me and a laptop. I made the mistake of thinking my family might be proud, too. I tried to explain it to them over turkey and stuffing. It's a logistics optimization platform, I said, trying to contain my excitement. It uses AI to predict inventory needs and streamline warehouse workflow. We've already got 2 small clients, and they've seen a 15% increase in efficiency. My father just stared at me, his fork halfway to his mouth. So, you're still in the warehouse business? It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. My Uncle Mark laughed. Let me get this straight. You got people to give you money so you can tell other people how to stack boxes better. The table chuckled. My Aunt Carol patted my hand. Oh, that's nice, dear. It's good to have a hobby. I felt my face flush with heat. It's not a hobby. It's a real company. We have employees, a payroll. Oh, I'm sure it is, Jessica said, patting my arm in a show of mock sympathy. Don't worry, Alex. Everyone is entitled to their little passion projects. The conversation moved on, leaving me feeling like a child who had just shown his parents a macaroni necklace and expected them to frame it. Then my father stood up, glass in hand. I'd like to make a toast, he announced, his voice booming. To my daughter, Jessica. Just got a massive promotion to Senior Director of Marketing. A real job with a real salary and a real future. Her bonus this year is more than most people make in 5. We are so proud of you. Everyone cheered. They clinked glasses. They congratulated her. My Uncle Mark slapped my father on the back. You raised a winner there, Richard. I just sat there, invisible again. I looked across the table at Jessica. She caught my eye and gave me a tiny, pitying smile. It was worse than any insult. It was the smile of someone who had won a race she didn't even know I was running. It was the smile of someone who was sure I was a lost cause. That was the night I stopped trying. I stopped explaining. I stopped seeking their approval. I realized that their validation was a cage, and the only way to be free was to stop rattling the bars. I built a wall inside myself that night. On my side of the wall, I would build my company. On their side, they could have their opinions. The two would never have to meet. So when my mother called me 3 years later, a few weeks before the Mortons' dinner, her voice laced with that familiar, gentle guilt, I almost said no. Your father is hosting his most important clients, she'd said. It would mean so much to him if you were there, just for a few hours. Please, Alex. For me. I knew why she was asking. It was about appearances. The perfect family. But as I was about to refuse, a thought struck me. My company was on the verge of a massive public announcement. The Bloomberg interview was already filmed. The new valuation was locked in. Maybe it was time for the two sides of my wall to finally meet. Okay, Mom, I said, a strange calmness settling over me. I'll be there. I didn't go to that dinner seeking their approval anymore. I went to that dinner to quietly, and finally close a chapter of my life. I just didn't realize I'd be closing it with a billion-dollar explosion. Back to the present. We were seated at the long, polished mahogany table. The waiter had just taken our drink orders. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes on me, the curious, assessing glances of my father's world. They saw my simple, dark clothes so different from their tailored suits and silk dresses, and they made their calculations. My father, ever the showman, decided to address the elephant in the room, me. Everyone, this is my son, Alex, he said, the words heavy with forced politeness. He's between opportunities right now, taking some time to figure things out. I didn't flinch. I just offered a small, neutral smile. Actually, I said, my voice calm and even, I run a logistics software company. He waved his hand dismissively, just as he had on the phone all those years ago. Yes, he works at warehouses. Fascinating stuff. We're hoping he'll transition to something more professional soon. A man named Robert Vance, one of my father's biggest clients, looked at me with a flicker of interest. He seemed like a decent guy, sharp and inquisitive. Another man, a corporate lawyer named David Chun, also tilted his head slightly, a thoughtful expression on his face. But before either could speak, Jessica leaned in. Don't mind Alex, she said with a stage whisper that carried across the table. He's in his building character phase. Has been for about 5 years now. The laughter was polite, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. The old anger, the familiar sting of humiliation, began to bubble up inside me. But I pushed it down. Not tonight. Tonight I was just an observer. I was here to watch the final act of a play they had written. The waiter set a glass of expensive scotch in front of my father and a simple club soda in front of me. Still not drinking? My father asked, his tone implying it was another one of my strange, unsophisticated habits. A man can't close a deal without a good scotch in his hand, son. I have a major software deployment tonight, I said simply. Need to keep a clear head. Jessica snorted. A software deployment? Alex, you're not conducting a divorce settlement or launching a hostile takeover. You're probably just updating the inventory list for a shipment of toilet paper. I looked at her, really looked at her. Her life was a series of perfect Instagram posts, promotions, vacations in Tuscany, charity galas. Her success was shiny and easily understood. Mine was complex, hidden behind firewalls and lines of code. buried in the unglamorous heart of commerce. She didn't dismiss me because she was evil. She dismissed me because she couldn't comprehend a world where value wasn't measured by job titles and designer handbags. Something like that, I said, turning my attention to my club soda. There was no point in arguing. You can't explain the color blue to someone who has chosen to see the world in black and white. They had their narrative and they were sticking to it. But I had a secret, a narrative of my own, and it was about to go live to an audience of millions. The appetizers arrived, tuna tartare and shrimp cocktails. The conversation shifted to a new corporate merger, a topic where my father and his guests were on solid ground. I was content to remain silent, a ghost at the feast. But Robert Vance, the client, wasn't done with me. He turned to me, his expression genuinely curious. "Logistics software, you said?" he asked, ignoring my father's attempt to steer the conversation back to golf. "That's a tough space. Very competitive. What's your angle? Are you focusing on trucking routes? Shipping manifests?" For a moment, I was tempted to tell him everything. To talk about our proprietary AI, our predictive analytics, the way we were shaving millions off the operating costs of our clients. But then I looked at my father's face, tight with anxiety, and Jessica's, bored and impatient. It wasn't the time. "We focus on optimizing the last mile," I said, keeping it simple. "Making warehouse operations more efficient." "Fascinating," Robert said, leaning forward. "We have a massive supply chain. Our logistics budget is a nightmare. Keeps our lawyers busy, that's for sure. What kind of companies do you work with?" Before I could answer, my father jumped in, his laugh a little too loud. "Oh, it's mostly small, local businesses, Robert. Startup stuff." Alex is still getting his feet wet. He shot me a look, a clear warning. "Do not embarrass me." "It's entry-level logistics work," he added, for good measure. "Helping them organize their inventory, that sort of thing." I could have told them. I could have mentioned that our biggest client was the fourth largest retailer in the entire country. I could have said that the software deployment I was monitoring tonight was for that very client, a multimillion-dollar deal that would onboard 47 of their distribution centers onto our platform simultaneously. I could have mentioned that Flow State Systems had 127 employees and was projected to do $340 million in revenue that year. But what would have been the point? They wouldn't have believed me. Their image of me was set in stone. I was the dropout, the failure, the boy playing with boxes. Any claim to the contrary would have been dismissed as a desperate lie. Jessica, sensing the conversation was lingering on me for too long, decided to deliver the killing blow. "Honestly, Robert, don't encourage him," she said, waving her fork dismissively. "He's been telling us he runs this huge company for years. But he still works out of his apartment and drives a beat-up old Honda. I have an office in Long Island City," I corrected her calmly. 12,000 square feet. "And I drive a Honda because it's reliable, not because I can't afford something else." She just rolled her eyes, a perfect, theatrical expression of disbelief. "Sure you do, Alex. And I'm sure your salary is just fantastic. Tell me, does it even cover rent in this city?" The question hung in the air, a direct, vulgar challenge to my manhood and my success, all wrapped up in a condescending package. "I do all right," I said quietly. The conversation moved on, leaving me in the dust once again. But something had shifted. Robert Vance was looking at me differently, a thoughtful frown on his face. And across the table, the quiet lawyer, David Chun, had paused, his wine glass halfway to his lips. He had heard something that didn't quite add up. He heard the confidence in my voice, however quiet, and it contradicted the dismissive narrative my family was peddling. The first crack in my family's perfect facade had appeared. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a gentle, insistent vibration. I knew it was Sarah Jenkins, my CTO. The deployment was entering its critical phase. I had to check it. I discreetly pulled my phone out under the table, my thumb flying across the screen. A dashboard of metrics appeared. Server loads, data migration progress, error rates. Everything was green. So far, so good. "Alexander." My father's voice was sharp, cutting through my concentration like a whip crack. Put that phone away. You are at a professional dinner. We are discussing multimillion-dollar deals, and you're playing with your phone like a teenager. Show some respect. All heads turned to me. I felt the familiar heat of shame creep up my neck. I was being scolded like a child in front of an audience. I'm sorry, I said, my voice level. I'm just monitoring a project for a client. What kind of project is so important it can't wait a few hours? He demanded, his voice rising. Is one of your box shipments late? I took a deep breath. We're migrating the entire West Coast distribution network for a national retailer onto our platform. It's a sensitive operation. Jessica laughed out loud. It was a brittle, ugly sound. Oh my God, you're still going with this? A national retailer? Who is it? Alex? The local dollar store? Are you helping them track their shipments of plastic toys? This was it. The moment where the old me would have argued, would have pleaded, would have desperately tried to make them see. The old me would have named the client, thrown out the contract value, anything to stop the humiliation. But the old me was gone. Something like that, I said again, my voice devoid of emotion. I typed a quick message to Sarah. Status? Her reply was instantaneous. Phase 1 complete. 47 centers online. 0 errors. Moving to Phase 2. You built a solid ship, Captain. A wave of relief and pride washed over me. My team was incredible, but my father wasn't done. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said, addressing the table at large. A complete lack of professionalism. No real job, no respect. It's a constant source of worry. It was at that moment that the lawyer David Chen finally spoke. He hadn't said much all evening, but his voice was clear and precise. Excuse me, Richard, he said, his eyes on me. What did you say the name of your company was? I was surprised by the direct question. Flow State Systems, I replied. David Chen's eyebrows shot up. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. He looked at me, then at my father, and then back at me. The gears were turning in his head. Flow State, he murmured to himself. He pulled out his own phone, his fingers beginning to tap on the screen. I saw the shift. The power dynamic, for the first time all night, was no longer completely controlled by my father. An outside variable had been introduced. A piece of data that didn't fit their equation of my failure. I put my phone back in my pocket. I leaned back in my chair, and I made a decision. I wouldn't say another word to defend myself. I was done. The truth had its own momentum now. All I had to do was wait for it to arrive. The atmosphere at the table grew strange and heavy. My father tried to restart the conversation about the merger, but his words seemed to hang in the air, lacking their earlier authority. Jessica kept glancing nervously at David Chen, who was now scrolling intently through his phone. His brow furrowed in concentration. She tried to engage the woman next to her in some light gossip, but even that fell flat. It was a quiet, tense kind of chaos. The main performance, the public belittling of Alex Brennan, had been interrupted by a member of the audience who had decided to start fact-checking the program. I sat back and watched it all unfold. For the first time, I wasn't the one squirming. I wasn't the one feeling the heat of judgment. I felt a profound sense of calm. I had spent years building my company in the shadows, letting my work speak for itself. Tonight, the work was finally going to speak to them. Robert Vance tried to bridge the awkward silence. So, Richard, about that new zoning regulation, but his heart wasn't in it. His eyes, like everyone else's, kept darting towards David Chen and his phone. Whatever the lawyer was looking for, it was clearly more interesting than zoning laws. I saw David's eyes widen slightly. He scrolled back up, read something again, and then slowly shook his head in disbelief. He had found something. My father, sensing he was losing his audience, doubled down. As I was saying, he said, his voice a little too loud, it's all about having a solid, traditional career path. Something stable. A good salary, a pension plan. Not these flights of fancy. He gave me a pointed look. It was one last, desperate attempt to reinforce his narrative before it shattered completely. He was trying to convince them, and maybe himself, that he was right, that I was the failure he needed me to be. Across the room, the waiter who had turned on the TV earlier reappeared. He picked up the remote, his movements crisp and professional. The Bloomberg network was heading into its top-of-the-hour primetime slot. The volume went up a notch, filling the silence that had fallen over our table. I knew the schedule. The Innovator's Spotlight was the lead story. My heart began to beat a little faster. The fuse had been lit. Now all I had to do was wait for the explosion. It was coming. I could feel it in the charged air of the room. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of anticipation. And David Chun was about to light the match. David Chun looked up from his phone. He took off his glasses, polished them slowly with a napkin, and put them back on. The small, deliberate actions drew every eye in the room. He looked directly at me, then at my father. The entire table fell silent. "Richard," David said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Your son is being modest." My father forced a laugh, a harsh, nervous sound. "Modest? David, the boy thinks running a delivery app is the next big thing. He's—" "Flow state systems," David interrupted, his voice firm. He wasn't talking to my father anymore. He was addressing the room. "They're the leading platform for warehouse automation and supply chain optimization. They're not a startup, Richard. They're the market leader." A collective, sharp intake of breath seemed to circle the table. Jessica's face had gone pale. I saw her hand tremble as she reached for her water glass. David continued, his eyes fixed on his phone screen. "I'm looking at an article in Forbes right now. The Quiet Giant Revolutionizing Logistics. It's about your son's company." He looked up. "It says Flow State did $340 million in revenue last year. $340 million. The number just hung there in the air. It was an impossible, absurd figure that didn't compute with the image of the warehouse worker my father had so carefully crafted." My father stared at David, his mouth slightly agape. That's a typo. It must be 340,000. Maybe." "I don't think so," David said, scrolling further. He let out a low whistle. "And it says here they've raised significant venture capital." He looked at me, a question in his eyes. I decided to answer. It was time. "Series A was $12 million from Lightspeed Venture Partners," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room. "Series B was $45 million from Sequoia Capital." The names landed like bombs. Sequoia Capital. In the world of business and tech, that name was royalty. It was the ultimate stamp of approval. It meant you weren't just a company. You were a phenomenon. It was a name my father and everyone at this table knew and revered. Robert Vance looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "Sequoia? You're backed by Sequoia." I just nodded. Jessica looked from me to her father, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning horror. "What is he talking about? Dad? This is a joke, right? This is some kind of stupid, elaborate joke." But it wasn't a joke. And the punchline was just about to be delivered. Not by me, but by the anchorwoman on the television screen right behind my father's head. The introductory music for the next segment began to swell. Just as Jessica's frantic question hung in the electrified air, the familiar, upbeat theme music of the Innovator's Spotlight began to play from the television. Everyone's head swiveled towards the screen, as if pulled by an invisible string. The anchor appeared, smiling. "If you've ever ordered a package online," she began, her voice resonating with authority, "chances are you've been touched by the work of our next guest, though you've probably never heard his name." A slickly produced montage began to play. Footage of massive, humming warehouses, fleets of delivery trucks, and complex graphics showing data streams flowing across a map of the United States. It was my company's promotional reel, the one we showed to major investors. I recognized the footage from our Nevada facility. My father was frozen, his steak knife held motionless over his plate. Jessica's hand was clamped over her mouth, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her cheek. Her eyes were wide, darting from the screen to my face and back again, unable to process what she was seeing. "He's the man who built the invisible engine behind e-commerce." The anchor's voiceover continued. the founder of a company that has quietly become one of the most essential and most valuable players in the global supply chain. The montage ended and the screen cut to a shot of me. Not the me in the dark jeans sitting at their table, but the CEO me. I was in my office, a clean, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I was wearing a crisp button-down shirt, no tie. I looked relaxed, confident, authoritative. I looked like a stranger to them. The anchor's voice returned. And the most remarkable part of this story? He's only 27 years old. I watched my father's face. The confusion, the disbelief. It was all melting away, replaced by a look of pure, slack-jawed shock. His entire perception of me, of his own son, was being systematically dismantled in front of his most important colleagues. This wasn't just a revelation. It was a public humiliation of his own judgment. Then came the final, devastating blow. The anchor looked directly into the camera, a note of awe in her voice. Flow State Systems has just closed a new round of funding, she announced, which now values the company at a staggering $1.3 billion. Billion. The word echoed in the silent room. It was a number so large, so far beyond their comprehension of me, that it felt like a physical force. It sucked the air out of the room. Jessica made a small, choking sound. Billion? She whispered, her voice trembling. Did she say, billion? The camera on the TV zoomed in on my face for the final word of the segment's introduction. The anchor's voice was filled with a dramatic flourish. Tonight, we talked to the man himself, the founder, the CEO, and with a 68% stake in his company, the tech world's newest billionaire, Alexander Brennan. My name, my full name, spoken with reverence on national television. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier and more profound than any shouting match we'd ever had. It was the sound of a world being turned completely upside down. It was the sound of their narrative, the one they had clung to for 5 long years, shattering into a million pieces. It was the sound of my new reality crashing down upon them. The interview began to play. I watched myself on screen talking about algorithms and automation, about the future of logistics. But I wasn't really listening to the words. I was watching my family. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. His face was ashen, his eyes were wide and vacant. He was staring at the screen, at the son he never knew, and the foundation of his world was crumbling beneath him. All his metrics for success, the right schools, the right titles, the right connections, were suddenly rendered meaningless. His own son had achieved a level of success so monumental that it made his own considerable achievements look like a child's game. Jessica was crying. Silent tears were streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. They weren't tears of pride. They were tears of shock, of confusion, and maybe, just maybe, of shame. The brother she had pitted, the one she had mocked as an embarrassing failure, was so far beyond her league that she couldn't even comprehend the distance. The entire social hierarchy of their family, with her at the top and me at the bottom, had just been obliterated. It was in that moment, at the absolute peak of this strange, painful, and deeply satisfying vindication, that my phone vibrated. A different kind of notification. It wasn't my CTO. It was my father's. His phone, on the table next to his untouched plate of food, began to ring. The caller ID flashed on the screen, visible to everyone nearby. Charles Morrison, Dean, Columbia Business School. My father stared at the name as if it were a ghost. He fumbled for the phone, his hands shaking, and answered it. Charles? He croaked. Yes, I'm fine. What can I do for you? He listened, his face growing paler with every passing second. He kept glancing from the phone to me, his eyes filled with a new, terrifying kind of understanding. This wasn't a business call. It was something else. Yes, he finally managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, he's my son. He listened again, nodding numbly. I see. A donation for the entrepreneurship fund. He closed his eyes. I see. Yes. Thank you for calling. He hung up the phone, placing it back on the table with a clatter. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. "That was the dean," he said to the silent table. "He was calling to thank me, to thank our family." He swallowed hard. "Alex just made a donation to the school's entrepreneurship program, the one he dropped out of." He took a ragged breath. $1.2 million. The second explosion right after the first. It wasn't just that I had money. It was that I was giving it away on a scale he couldn't imagine. I wasn't just a success. I was a philanthropist, a benefactor, a pillar of the very establishment he worshipped, the one he accused me of disrespecting. The interview on the TV ended. The screen cut to a commercial for a luxury car. The spell was broken, and the new reality began to sink in. This is the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my own story. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're amazing. Please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, just so I know you've been on this journey with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. The silence was finally shattered by the frantic buzzing of another phone. This time it was Robert Vance's. He glanced at the screen, his eyes widening. "It's my CEO," he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. He quickly typed a reply. A moment later, he looked up at me, his entire demeanor transformed. The polite curiosity was gone, replaced by an intense, almost desperate focus. "Alex," he said, his voice urgent. "My boss, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, wants to know when you can meet. He wants to talk about a potential partnership. He says, and I quote, 'Do whatever it takes to get in a room with him.'" The whiplash was staggering. 10 minutes ago, I was the embarrassing son, the charity case. Now, I was the gatekeeper to a billion-dollar company, and a man my father deeply respected was practically begging for a meeting through his top lieutenant. My father just stared, speechless. He had spent the whole night trying to impress these men, and in a single moment, I had become the one they needed to impress. "Have him go through the proper channels," I told Robert, my voice even. "There's an enterprise client form on our website. Our sales team will vet the application and get back to him." Robert looked taken aback. The website? "Alex, this is the CEO of—" "We have a process," I said simply, cutting him off gently. "We follow it for everyone. It's how we ensure we're a good fit for our partners." I wasn't trying to be arrogant. I was just being a CEO. This was how my business ran. But in that room, it was a declaration of power. I was not going to be swayed by the old boys club rules that my father lived by. The game had changed, and they were playing on my field now. My phone buzzed again. It was Sarah. Phase 2 complete. All systems stable. Deployment 100% successful. I typed back a simple reply. "Incredible work. Tell the team I'm on my way. Drinks are on me." A real smile, the first genuine one of the night, spread across my face. That text message, that was the real victory. The successful deployment. The work itself. The thing I had been building in the dark for 5 years was running perfectly. That mattered more than the shocked faces around me. It was the real success. I folded my napkin and placed it on the table. The meal was over. As I stood up to leave, my father finally found his voice. "Alex, wait." He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Jessica rose with him, her face tear-streaked and blotchy. The powerful, confident businessman and his polished, perfect daughter looked small, lost, and utterly defeated. "Son, he started, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea. I am so sorry. I misjudged everything," he said, shaking his head. "I was a fool. An arrogant, blind fool. I was so wrapped up in what I thought success looked like. I never bothered to look at you." Jessica stepped forward, her hands twisting in front of her. "Alex, I've been horrible to you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "For years. I mocked you. I dismissed you. I was petty and cruel. And I am so sorry." I looked at them, at their desperate, pleading faces. A part of me, the wounded part that had carried their judgment for so long, wanted to lash out. I wanted to yell, to ask them why it took $1 billion for them to see me. Why my hard work wasn't enough. Why my passion was a joke until it was validated by a news anchor. I wanted to hurt them the way they had hurt me. But looking at them, I didn't feel anger. I just felt a profound sense of sadness. A sadness for the years we had lost. For the relationship we could have had if they had just bothered to look past their own rigid definitions of success. I took a deep breath. "I don't need an apology," I said, and their faces fell. "I just need you to understand." I looked my father in the eye. "You didn't misjudge my company, Dad. You misjudged me. You decided I was a failure the day I walked out of Columbia because I didn't fit into the box you built for me." I turned to Jessica. "And you weren't horrible to me because you thought I was a failure. You were horrible to me because the idea that I might succeed on my own terms, in a way you didn't understand, was threatening to you." "I accept your apologies," I said, my voice softening slightly. "But things have to change. I'm not that kid you can dismiss at the dinner table anymore. I'm not going to fight for your approval. You either see me for who I am, or you don't." With that, I turned and walked out of the private dining room, leaving them standing there in the wreckage of their own making. I didn't look back. I had a team to celebrate with. I had a future to build. A few weeks passed. The dust began to settle. The story of the Mortons' dinner became a strange, surreal memory. My life, however, had never been more real. I didn't celebrate my success at some Michelin star restaurant. I celebrated it at a loud, cheerful, slightly sticky pub in Long Island City, just a few blocks from our office. My team was there, all 127 of them that were local. The engineers, the salespeople, the logistics coordinators, the people who had believed in flow state when it was just an idea on a whiteboard in my tiny apartment. Sarah, my CTO and my very first hire, raised her beer glass. "To Alex!" she shouted over the din of the bar. "The only CEO I know who can close a Series B funding round and still remember the name of the cleaning lady's kid." The room erupted in cheers. I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that no amount of money could ever buy. These people were my real family. They had seen me at my most stressed, at my most doubtful. They had shared cold pizzas with me at 3 a.m. while we worked through a system bug. They hadn't needed a Forbes article or a Bloomberg interview to believe in me. They just did. I spent the night moving through the crowd, talking to everyone. I talked with Ben, our head of data science, about a new machine learning model he was excited about. I talked with Maria from HR about her daughter's upcoming college applications. I arm wrestled with Dave from our server team and lost spectacularly. This was real. This was meaningful. This was the company culture I had dreamed of building. Later that night, as I was walking home through the quiet streets of Queens, my phone buzzed. I expected another email, another request for a meeting from a VC or a potential client. But it was a text from a number I hadn't heard from in a while. My mom. The message was short. "We love you. We're so proud of you. We should have been proud all along." I stopped under a streetlight. I read the message again and again. It was the words I had longed to hear for 5 years. But now that they were here, they felt different. They were welcome, yes, but they weren't necessary anymore. My sense of self-worth was no longer tied to their approval. It was forged in warehouses and coded into my software. It was reflected in the respect of my team. I typed back a simple reply. "I love you too, Mom." A single tear rolled down my cheek. Not a tear of sadness or even of vindication. It was a tear of release. I was finally free. The chapter was well and truly closed. The future was mine to write, and for the first time I felt like I had a family that might actually want to read it. My father called the next day. He didn't talk about business. He just asked me how I was. Really asked. It was a start. A week later, Jessica asked to meet me for coffee. It was the last thing I expected. I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. We met at a small, neutral cafe halfway between my office and her high-rise apartment. She looked different. The usual armor of confidence and designer clothes was still there, but her eyes were tired, uncertain. She fidgeted with her coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. I haven't been able to sleep, she said finally, her voice small. I keep replaying that night at the restaurant over and over in my head. The things I said, the way I looked at you. I just waited, sipping my coffee. I wasn't going to make this easy for her, but I was willing to listen. I need you to know, she said, finally looking at me. It wasn't just about the money or the success. I mean, it was, but it was more than that. She took a shaky breath. I was jealous of you, Alex. I've always been jealous of you. I almost choked on my coffee. Jealous? Of me? Jess, you were the golden child. You had everything. The grades, the praise, the clear path. I had the things they wanted. She corrected me, her voice bitter. I had the good grades, the prestigious law school, the corporate promotion. I followed the playbook. I did everything I was supposed to do. I have a 6-figure salary, a beautiful apartment, and I am utterly, completely miserable. Her eyes welled up with tears. But you were brave. You walked away from all of it. You had this crazy, impossible idea, and you were willing to get your hands dirty, to be laughed at, to have Dad threatened to cut you off from any inheritance. You were willing to fail, all for something you believed in. She looked down at her cup. I've never believed in anything that much. Not in my job. Not in my life. I've just been checking boxes, collecting trophies that Mom and Dad wanted for their shelf. And when I saw you on that screen, I didn't just see a billionaire. I saw someone who was free. And I hated you for it, because I was trapped. Her confession hit me harder than any of her insults ever had. For the first time, I didn't see my sister, the antagonist. I saw a person, just as lost and insecure as I had been, just hiding it better behind a wall of achievement. My fight had been against their expectations. Her tragedy was that she had met them. My anger towards her, the resentment I had held for so long, simply evaporated. It was replaced by a quiet, aching sense of pity. You're not trapped, Jess, I said softly. It's never too late to write your own playbook. She looked up, a flicker of something, maybe hope in her eyes. We sat in silence for a while after that. The unspoken truths of our lives finally laid bare between us. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wouldn't magically erase years of hurt. But it was a start. It was the first honest conversation we'd had in our entire adult lives. And it was more valuable than any billion-dollar valuation. Today, I'm standing on the mezzanine level of our newest, fully automated fulfillment center in Nevada. Below me, a quiet symphony of robotics is playing out. Robotic arms glide with silent precision, sorting packages. Autonomous vehicles zip along designated paths, carrying goods from shelves to sorting stations. It's the physical manifestation of all those lines of code I wrote in my tiny apartment all those years ago. My relationship with my family is a work in progress. My dad is trying. He reads articles about supply chain management now. He asks me questions, clumsy but sincere. He's trying to learn my language. Jessica quit her marketing job. She's taking a sabbatical, traveling, trying to figure out what she actually wants from life. We really talk once a week. My mom just seems happier, lighter. The pressure is off. But as I stand here, watching my creation, I realize something profound. The moment of triumph wasn't at that steakhouse dinner. It wasn't seeing the shock on their faces or hearing the word billionaire attached to my name. Those were just moments of validation, fleeting and ultimately hollow. The real triumph is this: the hum of the servers, the quiet efficiency of the robots, the knowledge that a package will get to someone's doorstep a little faster, a little cheaper, a little more reliably because of the system my team and I built. It's the text from Sarah about a new breakthrough, the laughter in the pub with my team, the thank you note from a small business client whose company we helped save. The real success wasn't proving my doubters wrong. It was solving the problem I set out to solve. It was the work itself. That was the real victory. And the truth is, I'd known it all along, even when nobody else did. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. The journey has been long, and it's far from over, but I'm grateful for every single step. I have a question for you all. Have you ever had a moment where you had to bet on yourself? even when no one else would? Let me know in the comments below. I read as many as I can. And if you'd like to hear more, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. Thank you again.